Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're really getting into the weeds, looking at Jonathan Edwards and how he constructs his argument for original sin.
Right, specifically that first foundational step.
Exactly. We're focusing on how he tries to prove that there's a natural propensity to sin in humanity. And crucially, he separates this from proving whether that tendency is actually, morally corrupt. That comes later.
Yeah, that separation is key to understanding his method. So our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to really unpack the logical steps Edwards takes.
We want to see how he argues that the universal, constant fact that everyone fails to keep God's law perfectly isn't just bad luck or circumstance.
But that it demonstrates an inherent, an effectual tendency within human nature itself, a tendency towards sin, and, as he argues, consequently, towards eternal ruin.
So we need to follow his logic carefully, distinguish the observation, what actually happens, from the judgable about it.
Okay, let's start with the logical framework.
Yeah, the groundwork. The big question here seems simple, but it's got huge implications, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Does the fact that everyone, without exception, commits some sin prove there's a fixed natural tendency towards it? Or could it just be, a series of unfortunate events influenced by the world around us?
Edwards really pushes us to think almost like scientists here, looking at human behavior as data.
Right. Cause and effect.
And the first thing is his definition of propensity or tendency. This is where he sets the stage very carefully.
How does he define it then?
He defines it not as some inner feeling, but as a prevailing liableness or exposedness to a specific outcome. It's functional.
Okay, so it's about the likelihood of something happening based on the nature of the thing.
Pretty much. It's about a fixed reality that you figure out by seeing what results it produces. It's not something you just know intuitively.
You have to infer it.
You infer it.
Yeah.
And he's very clear. It is inferred no other way than by observation of events.
So if we can't see the tendency itself, what kind of observation proves it?
It's about the commonness or constancy. That's the key.
Not just a one-off event.
No. He says if something happens just once, or maybe sporadically, reason can't conclude there's a fixed propensity. A single mistake could be an accident.
But if it happens consistently,
Constant failure points to a fixed reality in the cause. To understand the nature of something, you need steady, predictable results.
okay, so that brings us to the cause and effect rule he relies on.
Yeah, this is the philosophical engine of the argument. He's basically saying human nature is like a system, and we're observing its output.
And if the output, the effect, is steady,
Then the cause must be steady. A steady effect argues a steady cause. It's basic logic.
so if the effect sinfulness happens consistently in everyone,
Then reason tells you there must be a stated prevalence in the cause. The underlying tendency has to be strong enough, effectual enough to guarantee that outcome.
it can't be a weak cause if the effect is universal.
Right. If the cause wasn't sufficient, the effect wouldn't be so constant. The fact that it always happens proves the cause has this systematic bias or weight towards that result, a preponderation, as he puts it.
Which leads us nicely into that die analogy. That really makes it clear.
It does. It cuts through a lot of the abstraction. He says, imagine a die. You throw it millions of times, no skill involved, just random throws.
Okay.
And suppose it constantly falls on the same side, every single time, or almost every time. What do you conclude?
Well, the die is loaded, right? Something's wrong with its balance or weight.
Exactly. You'd have not the least doubt. There's a propensity in the die's constitution. Maybe it's weighted unevenly. The point is, you don't need to see inside the die.
The constant outcome is the proof.
The constancy of the effect proves the underlying state.
So in this analogy, human nature is the die.
Yes.
And all the different lives people live, in all sorts of circumstances, those are the throws.
Right.
And the constant result falling on the side of sin must, logically, prove there's an internal fixed propensity in human nature itself. We're just watching the mechanism work.
And notice at this stage, he hasn't even touched whether this propensity is morally bad or good. He's just established its existence as a fact.
Right. He's locked it in based on observation and causality.
He's observed the universal failure, linked it through the cause and effect rule to an unseen internal state.
It's clever because it forces opponents to either deny basic causality, which is irrational,
Or deny the observable fact that everyone sins, which goes against Scripture and, frankly, experience.
so the existence of the propensity is established before we even get to the arguments about fairness or blame.
Okay, so we have the logical tool. Now, what's the data? What's the steady effect Edwards points to?
It's that universal, unavoidable fact. All mankind commits some sin. Everyone fails to keep God's law perfectly.
This is the baseline reality, acknowledged even by those who argued against him on original sin.
And we need to be clear about the standard here. It's perfect obedience, not just being mostly good.
Absolutely. The moral law demands perfection. Any deviation, even the smallest one, counts as failure.
And this failure, he says, is the issue that all men do actually come to. Everyone ends up here.
And because it's universal, every single person sins at least once. This single fact triggers the catastrophic consequences he talks about.
Okay, what are those?
This guaranteed failure results in a degree of sinfulness that, he argues, implies and infers utter ruin, even extreme misery and eternal ruin.
Because the law is absolute.
Yes. If the law says the soul that sins shall die, and everyone sins, then the logical result under that legal framework is unavoidable.
So no man living can be justified by the law.
Correct. Every single person is automatically exposed to condemnation simply by failing to meet the standard of perfect obedience. The ruin is guaranteed by the failure.
It doesn't matter how big or small the sin is at this point in the logic.
Not for the basic fact of condemnation under law. Any sin breaks the covenant of works. It ensures a demerit of and just exposedness to eternal ruin. And this isn't a rare outcome. It's the universal constant result.
So proving a tendency to sin is effectively proving a tendency toward ruin.
The consequence is tied directly to the failure itself.
Edwards then strengthens this point by looking at the consistency across different situations. It's not just that people fail, but they fail everywhere, always.
Right, the constancy across circumstances. This is a powerful empirical point. If failure only happened in one type of society or situation, you could blame the environment.
But that's not what we see.
No. He points out this failure happens despite an immense diversity of persons and circumstances. All countries, climates, nations, different historical ages, different upbringings, different social conditions.
Rich, poor, educated, uneducated.
Doesn't matter. Whether you look at the most advanced societies or the most isolated tribes, people with the best moral training or the worst, the result is the same. Sin happens.
It's like taking that loaded die and throwing it everywhere on the moon underwater.
Exactly. If it still keeps landing on the same side, you become even more certain the problem is internal to the die.
He uses the analogy of a tree, doesn't he?
Yes. If you have a specific kind of tree and you plant it in every possible soil and climate imaginable, and it always produces bad fruit.
Then you know the problem isn't the soil or the climate. It's the nature of that kind of tree.
Precisely. The failure isn't environmental, it's characteristic of the species.
So the constant bad fruit sin across all human circumstances proves the nature and tendency of the humankind. It's a powerful statistical argument, really.
Therefore, he concludes, the apparent and acknowledged fact of universal sin proves, by the rules of cause and effect, a propensity within the present nature of mankind.
A propensity to do what?
Eternally to ruin themselves by sin. The tendency is proven, and its ruinous consequence is proven, just by observing the consistent outcome.
Okay, so the propensity exists, and it leads to ruin. The next logical step is, where does it come from? Where is it located?
Right. Edwards acknowledges the surface observation. We see people prone to sinful indulgence, often linked to so many sensual appetites and so apt to indulge them.
So things like greed, lust, anger, related to our physical desires.
Yeah, but where does that aptness, that readiness to indulge, actually originate? He frames it as an internal issue.
How so?
He says it must come either from the body, which God hath made the physical constitution itself, or be immediately and originally seated in the soul itself. Either way, body or soul, the root is within the human makeup, not external to it.
But this is where his opponents, like Dr. Taylor, tried to find an escape hatch,
Right.
the external evasion.
Exactly. They'd concede, okay, yes, everyone sins, but they'd argue the tendency isn't truly in human nature.
So where do they put it?
They blamed the general constitution and frame of this world. They argued the world is just full of so many and strong temptations.
So the idea is the soul starts out pure, but it gets placed in this corrupting world, and the world inevitably makes it sin.
That's the argument. The environment is the source of the corruption, not the nature itself.
Edwards had to counter that, obviously. How did he do it?
He uses a systemic argument. He says, look, if any creature proves to be bad or fails in the proper situation God designed for it,
Its intended environment.
then you have to conclude that the creature itself has an evil nature, or at least a defective one relative to its purpose in that situation.
That makes sense. Like the clock analogy you mentioned earlier, if it's designed for a certain humidity but always fails in that humidity.
You blame the clock's design, not the humidity it was made for.
Okay.
Edwards puts it formally. A propensity properly belongs to a being's nature if it's the necessary consequence of its nature interacting with its proper situation in the universe.
And our proper situation is this world.
Right, and this world, he argues, is as much of God's ordering as man's nature itself. You can't just separate the creature from the environment God specifically made for that creature. They function together as a system.
So the opponent's attempt to blame the world is a false separation.
Edwards argues it is. The fact that this world always results in sin for humans proves there's a pernicious tendency belonging to their nature. The consistent failure in the intended environment points back to an inherent flaw or vulnerability in the creature designed for that environment.
The world pulls the trigger, but the gun was already loaded, so to speak.
That's a way to put it. The nature has an inherent susceptibility that the environment invariably activates.
And then he uses their own theology against them.
Yes. The refuting divine authorship through concession. This is quite clever. He takes their idea that the world infallibly pollutes a pure soul and shows the devastating implication for their view of God.
How?
He asks the simple, powerful question, who created the world?
God did.
So if God created a world that is designed in such a way that it naturally and infallibly pollutes every soul placed within it,
Then God becomes the ultimate author of that pollution, the author of sin.
which contradicts the opponent's own belief in a righteous, holy God who is not the author of sin, it forces them into a corner.
And he even quotes them.
Yes, he points out that Dr. Taylor himself describes this world as being full of God's riches, mercy, and goodness.
So if the world itself is fundamentally good, as even the opponent admits,
Then how can it be the ultimate source of this universal, inevitable corruption? It doesn't add up.
so the blame has to fall back onto human nature itself.
Exactly. It pushes the problem back inside the person. The infallible tendency must be rooted in man's nature. The propensity is inherent.
Whether it's more bodily appetite or a lack in the soul, the point is, it's in the human system.
That's the crucial step. He eliminates the environmental excuse and locates the necessity for sin firmly within the human constitution.
Okay, we've established the propensity exists, and it's inherent to human nature. Now, how strong is this tendency?
This is where Edwards argues its strength based on the unfailing nature of the effect. The fact that sin is not just common but universal and constant proves the propensity is of the highest kind.
Meaning
It's not just a slight inclination or a strong probability. He defines this highest kind of tendency as one that is universally invincible.
invincible. That sounds strong. Like unavoidable.
Functionally, yes. He says it really amounts to a fixed, constant, unfailing necessity. If an outcome happens 100% of the time across millions of cases, then for all practical purposes, it's a necessary outcome of the system as it currently operates.
So he's deriving necessity from the sheer consistency of the observation.
Precisely. It's an empirical necessity. He's observing that, in fact, humans never succeed in achieving sinless perfection. Therefore, failure is, in that sense, necessary.
So while people still make choices to sin,
The overall system, human nature in its current state, is so tilted or flawed that the outcome universal failure is guaranteed. The propensity ensures the effect.
that's a key distinction. It's not saying people are puppets, but that the internal constitution makes sin inevitable overall.
Right, and what's really striking here is how he uses the concessions of hopelessness from his opponents to back this up.
He shows how they basically admit this necessity.
Yeah, he points to their own words. For instance, Dr. Taylor says mankind's situation under the law threatening death for every sin, must be quite deplorable if they have no relief from the mercy of the lawgiver.
Deplorable. Why is that significant?
Edwards jumps on that. If the situation is deplorable without mercy, it implies it's functionally hopeless otherwise. Why call it deplorable if people could actually succeed through their own efforts under the law?
Good point. It implies the only way out is mercy, meaning self-salvation through law-keeping is impossible.
It's a powerful rhetorical point. Their own language betrays a sense of helplessness, conceding that justification by works is off the table unless God steps in with mercy.
Do they say anything else that supports this?
Yes, Edwards notes they speak of trying to fulfill the law perfectly as truly impossible.
Impossible.
Yes, impossible for the law demanding sinless obedience to actually give life, specifically because of the weakness of our flesh.
Wow. So they admit impossibility due to human weakness.
which perfectly confirms Edwards's point about an invincible propensity. If achieving perfect obedience is truly impossible for humans in their current state.
Then the failure is necessary, and the propensity is as strong as Edwards claims invincible.
It validates his claim that the tendency to sin is so powerful that attempting to escape death by law-keeping is hopeless without divine intervention.
And what's the practical consequence of this invincible necessity?
Spiritual futility under the law. Edwards concludes that because of this fixed propensity, all human efforts to achieve righteousness by works are lost labor,
Wasted effort.
and it's impossible for them to expect aught but death based on their own performance under the law.
Okay, but we have to be careful here. Does this necessity, this impossibility of perfection, mean people aren't guilty? Does it remove responsibility?
That's a crucial point, and Edwards addresses it directly. No, it does not remove guilt.
Why?
Because the propensity to sin, even if it comes from a defect or an infirmity, like a lack of original righteousness, still results in an actual transgression of God's commands. And that transgression is justly condemned.
So the source of the sin, the defective nature, doesn't excuse the act of sin.
Correct. The necessity of sinning leads to a genuine demerit of and just exposedness to eternal ruin. Failing to meet God's standard is still a failure of duty, and duty is owed regardless of the creature's internal state.
So the universal failure means universal condemnation, even if that failure was unavoidable given our nature. This maintains God's justice.
Exactly. The argument structure is now complete. Edwards believes he's proven the propensity exists, it's inherent in human nature, it's invincibly strong, and its consequence is ruin and condemnation. All based, he argues, on observable facts that even his opponents concede. #TagZevV, summary and final thought.
Okay, let's try to pull this together for everyone listening. We've walked through a pretty dense logical argument from Edwards. What are the main takeaways?
I think we can break it down into 4 key pillars he built. First, the very idea of tendency or propensity isn't some mysterious feeling. It's proven entirely by constancy.
Right. You see the effect happen over and over again universally, and that's how you know there's a fixed tendency causing it. Observation is key.
Second, what is that constant effect in humanity? It's universal sinfulness. Everyone fails perfect obedience. And under God's law, that failure automatically leads to utter ruin and condemnation.
Okay, third.
Third, because this failure happens consistently across every imaginable human circumstance, different cultures, times, conditions, it proves the tendency isn't just external. It's an inherent, pernicious tendency within human nature itself, operating in the world God designed for it. The blame the world argument doesn't hold up.
Got it. And the final pillar.
Finally, the sheer fact that this failure is always the outcome, something even Edwards' opponents admitted was impossible to avoid, proves the tendency is of the highest degree. It amounts to an invincible necessity. Escape through human effort alone is functionally impossible.
So the logical conclusion of all this.
The conclusion Edwards drives us toward is that humanity's state, just based on observable reality and the demands of the law, is one of complete hopelessness for self-salvation.
Which then makes God's mercy not just nice, but absolutely necessary. It's the only way out.
Exactly. The law, in revealing this universal necessary failure, highlights our total inability and therefore magnifies the need for and the glory of God's grace in providing another way.
Now, this brings us back to that careful distinction Edwards made at the start. He spent all this effort proving the existence and necessity of this tendency towards sin and ruin, based on facts.
Right. He meticulously built the case for the what and the how strong.
But he intentionally held back on proving its moral quality. So here's the thought to leave you with. If the facts establish this inherent, universally invincible necessity towards sin and ruin, what kind of oral argument has to come next?
Yeah, what further step is needed to prove that this observed, functionally disastrous tendency is also, in the eyes of a perfectly righteous God, truly corrupt and depraved in itself?
Establishing the fact of the propensity is one thing. Establishing its inherent guilt or moral corruption is the next layer.
And that's the bridge to the deeper aspects of the doctrine of original sin, which involves inherited guilt and moral pollution, a crucial and perhaps even more debated step.
Definitely something to think about. We'll have to tackle that moral dimension in a future deep dive. Thanks for joining us on Reformed Thinking.